Hello and welcome to Indian Summer Festival and this special edition of our Tiffin Talk series, which we're thrilled to present in partnership with our friends at Surrey Art Gallery. These are uncertain and troubling times. There's a global pandemic that encircles the world, and there's political and social upheaval almost everywhere. And it's quite clear that we have a lot of fixing and healing to do on a human and planetary scale. At Indian Summer Festival, we've always tried to bring people together with warmth and welcome, but also encourage difficult conversations we need to have if we have to address what's wrong in our societies. Our Tiffin Talk series has been one important way of doing that, sharing a meal and bridging our ideological gaps together. It's a special thing to do this with the Surrey Art Gallery, who we've worked with for years and who have consistently turned out some of the most thoughtful and forward-looking exhibitions for arts lovers in the Lower Mainland. Of course, we can't meet in person right now, but we've reinvented ourselves to offer you a virtual lunchtime gathering today. Several organizations have supported us in bringing these programs to you. Simon Fraser University is our founding partner, and this is the 10th year of our partnership. Two other places of learning also support us in a major way, the University of British Columbia and Langara College. And RBC is our emerging artist partner. I'd also like to give a big shout out to our media partners, Spice Radio, the Georgia Strait, and CBC, for all they do to support us and spread the word. I also have to say I'm really touched by the support of individuals, so many who have donated to keep this festival going. Some of you did so when you signed up for this event. Thank you so much for that. For the past 10 years, we've really strived to bring people together to sort of model the kind of society we'd like to see, a society that's creative, that's diverse, that's inclusive, and connected. And we're so touched that I think 50, 75,000 viewers have tuned in so far to watch our digital programming as we stream to your homes. And yeah, we want to continue to do this work. We believe there's never been a more urgent time to do this. So for those of you who are in a position to do so, I'm asking you to make a donation today to get us to our goal. We're almost 65% to our fundraising target, and with a donation of $25 or more, you automatically become a supporter of Indian Summer Festival. And I think there's a link that will pop up that helps you do that. And yeah, if you can, that would be really lovely. Your gifts go towards enabling us to provide free participation in all of these digital events while still paying artists and still making sure that the crew and team get paid. And we couldn't do this work without you, so thank you. Today, we have the chance to meet three incredible thinkers and artists, who really, I think, hold up a mirror to some difficult truths. To introduce us to them properly, we have our moderator for this event, Suvi Bains. So allow me to introduce you to her. Suvi Bains is the Surrey Art Gallery's curatorial assistant. Suvi's training and passion lies in photography, and she's also an expressive art therapist with a keen interest in exploring personal narratives, especially those that reflect on the sort of stereotypes and stigmas that exist in marginalized communities. Her work is marked by the fact that it provokes empathy and cultural appreciation and understanding. And you'll see that embodied in Savi. And so glad to have her here today. And that even in these times, a festival can still bring people together and an art gallery can still be a home for art. Let's go to the Surrey Art Gallery to meet Suvi Bains.
Thank you, Srish, for that warm welcome. We're so thrilled to be partnering with Indian Summer Festival's Tiffin Talk. On behalf of Alison Raja, our gallery's director here at Surrey Art Gallery, and myself, Savi, would like to formally invite you to the gallery. Today starts our first live and virtual event inside the gallery's main walls. As you can see behind me, the beautiful paintings by the local artist Don Lee Leger from the exhibition Counting the Steps of the Sun. Today's event is called Zanani, Zamana, Zameen, Feminist Thinking, Society, and Place. I'd like to acknowledge that Surrey Art Gallery is located on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiahmoo nations. This unceded and ancestral territory has been never given up and embodies a really deep history. I'd like to also acknowledge my own settler position as an uninvited guest in culpability against the lives of Indigenous people. Surrey Art Gallery strives on an ongoing basis to be relevant to Indigenous communities. I'd like to also hold place of that palpable grief in our society as a result of police brutality and racialized violence against Black, Indigenous, and racialized people. Surrey Art Gallery supports Black Lives Matters as part of an anti-racist global movement. We commit to listening, educating, and taking action as we move forward. As part of Indian Summer Festival's Tiffin Talk, where ideas and food are shared together as we share a meal, just as we do in our own South Asian culture, we have taken inspiration for this Tiffin Talk from feminist artist Judy Chicago's 1974 dinner table. In Chicago's installation, she represented 39 historical women, women of accomplishment who are both familiar and unfamiliar, mythical and rarely spoken of. For today's event, we have asked each speaker to invite their own guest, a South Asian woman from history. These women have forged difficult pathways, fought for human rights, and their lives have become lightning rods for future movements. I am so thrilled and so honored to be in the presence of these powerful women. Hello, and now here we are. The virtual team has come together. Welcome, everyone. A warm welcome to each of you, Baljit, Shauna, and Sandeep. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. As I'm here at the gallery space, Sandeep and Baljit in Vancouver, and Shauna joining us across the border from Milwaukee and Wisconsin, I think it's quite incredible to be able to weave and knit these conversations virtually. So a sincere welcome to each of you. And thank you to our listeners. Welcome from afar and near. Wherever you might be, I welcome you to today's talk. And please know that there will be a Q&A after. I look forward to reading your questions. Before we start, I'd like to briefly frame today's conversation and the title for the event. As some of you may know, Zanani, Zamana, and Zameen are Urdu words that poetically describe the feminine, a period of time and land, place, and ground. As I start to think about your individual art practices and the visuals you share with the world to read, observe, and watch, each of you bring an interesting feminist narrative, which is the Zanani, the feminine. And I want to also explore how the Zamana, which is time, age, and period, informs your practice, even while the Zameen, which is your place, ground, and land, gives you the platform to present your ideas. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Shauna Singh Baldwin. She is a writer of fiction, poetry, and essays, having been published in literary and popular magazines, anthologies, and newspapers. Her most recent publication, Reluctant Rebellions, is a collection of speeches and essays delving into her personal journey as a writer and a South Asian woman who, as Shauna says, needs to become as hyphenated as possible. Thank you, Shauna, for being with us today and sitting at the table with me virtually.
Thank you.
Shauna, thank you. Shauna, I'd like to begin by asking you who invited you as your guest today.
So my guest today is Noor Inayat Khan. Noor Inayat Khan was a descendant of Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, an 18th century ruler of South India. She grew up in France, speaking French and Urdu. She was brought up a non-violent Indian nationalist by her Sufi musician father, Hazrat Inayat Khan. Yet in London, Noor trained as a secret agent for the British Special Operations Executive, and she took arms training and learned to shoot and kill. On a moonlit night at the height of World War II, Noor was flown into occupied France under the codename Madeleine. She arrived with a false passport, a clutch of French francs, and a pistol. She soon began transmitting secret information for the Resistance. when almost every member of her spy network was captured by the Germans, that's 1,500 people, she refused to return to London. She began moving from one safe house to the other, transmitting clandestinely for 3 months, evading the Germans until she was betrayed. My question was, who betrayed her? Arrested, Noor was interrogated about the timing and location of D-Day. She revealed nothing. The Germans sent her to a criminal prison instead of a concentration camp. They kept her shackled hand and foot for 9 months. Why did the Germans treat Noor differently from other captured SOE women? That was my question. On September 11th, 1944, as the Germans retreated before the invading Allies, they transported Noor to Dachau, along with 3 other women of the SOE, and there they executed her. But the transmission of this Muslim woman had contributed to the defeat of fascism in Europe. Noor was posthumously awarded the Croix de Guerre and the George Cross, one of only 3 women from the Special Operations Executive to receive the latter medal. In my 2004 biographical novel, The Tiger Claw, I explore the questions raised by Noor's story. A bust of Noor stands in London's Gordon Square, erected in 2012. It's the first statue to an Indian woman in Britain and the first to any Muslim. In 2014, the UK issued a stamp in her honor as well. That's Noor Inayat Khan. Welcome to the table.
Thank you, Shauna, for bringing Noor Inayat Khan to the table, a Muslim woman who contributed to the fight against fascism in Europe. It's important to have her with today, especially in these times, so thank you. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Sandeep Johal. Hi, Sandeep. Sandeep is a visual artist whose work ranges from intricate black and white line drawings to colorful large-scale murals. Her art practice is aesthetically and conceptually inspired by her South Asian heritage and is an expression of her social and cultural concerns, particularly gender justice. Sandeep, welcome. Hi there.
Thanks for having me, Savi.
Of course, thank you. Thanks for coming. I wonder, Sandeep, can you also share with our listeners who you also invited with your guests and sitting with me today?
Yes, I chose a very intriguing figure, a rebel, a legendary Daku, Phulan Devi, the India's bandit queen, to be my guest at the table. And I have so many questions about her and her life. Her short life seemed to be one big exercise in endurance. And reading her story, I wondered how much can one woman endure in her life? She was born into abject poverty and married off as a child bride at the age of 11 to a man 3 times her senior. And he was quite abusive, so she ran away. But her family sent her back to her husband, and then she ran away again. And this time her in-laws didn't allow her back. So she'd become a disgrace to her family, a social outcast, and she joined a gang. And with her gang, she exacted revenge on her husband and left a note in the village saying older men should not marry young girls. And then she ended up being kidnapped by a rival gang and held captive for weeks, and was sexually assaulted by a large number of men. And she escaped and joined another gang. And together with that gang, she avenged her assailants. So 2 years after the massacre, Indira Gandhi's government negotiated a public surrender, and she surrendered in front of 10,000 people. She refused to lay arms in front of the police. She wanted a photo of Gandhi and the goddess Durga, and then she would surrender, which I thought was quite a cool condition. And then she was charged for several crimes, went to prison for 11 years, was in prison for 11 years awaiting trial, but then her charges were dropped. And I wondered at that point in her life, would she go back to a life of crime? Would she just kind of give up and feel defeated about everything that she'd been through? But no, she became an MP in India's government for a few years, really trying to dismantle the system from the inside out. And then at the age of 37 in 2001, she was assassinated in retaliation for the massacre. And so for me, her story is just such an incredible story of resistance, rebellion, resilience, and of course, endurance. So I'd welcome Phulan Devi to the table.
Yeah, how incredible. I mean, Phulan Devi overcame, as you shared, such horrific odds. And it's so wonderful to see, I think, especially with your work, Sandeep, that you've dedicated some of your art to highlight the lives of women like Phulan Devi. And we will touch about that later in our conversation. So thank you. And lastly, but not least, I'd like to introduce to you our third speaker, Baljit Sangra. Baljit is a Vancouver-based filmmaker who uses documentary and factual entertainment to explore social and cross-cultural issues. She has had 6 nominations for the Leo Award and directed the profound Because We Are Girls film that pays tribute to the strength to South Asian women in the face of trauma. Baljit, welcome.
Hi, Savi. Thank you for having me.
If you can share with our listeners as well who you also brought to the table.
Yes, my dinner guest is Jyoti Singh. I'm sure most of our audience is familiar with her, but a bit about her. Jyoti Singh was a young, vibrant woman who, according to people who knew her and her parents, was kind, a generous soul. She was the first in her family to go to university. She was studying to be a doctor. In 2012, she was out with a male friend, and they got on a bus to go home after seeing a movie. That bus ride turned into a brutal assault and rape, and she was left for dead. She did go to the hospital, but died 13 days later. She was actually sent to Singapore and died there 2 days later to get better treatment. And it was just such a profound story, just the intense misogyny of it. Even now, when I think about it, just shakes me to the core. And that they were left on the street, her and her friend, and nobody came to help. And even when the police came, they weren't taking her to the hospital. They're just asking all these crazy questions. And after she died, women took to the streets in India. They shared their stories. They demanded justice. The protests shined a light on gender-based violence, gender inequality, and the patriarchy that supports this oppression. I mean, this is 2012, long before the Me Too movement, Women's March. India, shone a global light on gender-based violence. She was referred to in the media as Nirabhaya, which means fearless, but it's also a way of reporting about the incident without saying her name. And I remember seeing her mother speak to the media and say that she wants everyone to know her name and say it, Jyoti Singh. So yeah, I mean, I'm already so emotional as sharing my dinner guest with you right now. It's almost like I can't even speak. I saw a play, I don't know exactly what year it was, maybe a year or two after, in Vancouver called Nirabhaya. And it was at the York Theatre on Commercial Drive. And the playwright and the artists in the play were from India. And these were women who experienced sexual violence, and they shared their stories with the audience. It was so profound. I remember at one point at the beginning of the play, they asked the audience, who here has been impacted by sexual violence? And 2/3 of the hands of the audience went up. So just tells you like what we've gone through and how we just keep this hidden and the shame. And the play was so powerful. And I went with Jiti, who's in the film, and this is before we started filming the film, because we're girls, but the two of us were just weeping and holding hands. And we felt really, without saying words, if these women can share their story and break through those barriers of shame, what a seva for everyone, that for the greater good, and to always go back to that place of pain, but for the greater good. And they toured this play, across the country. And that stayed with me. And then, later down the road in my life, I got to bear witness to a journey, a story. And that's why I really want to pay tribute to Jyoti Singh and yeah, and I encourage people to look her up and know more about her and say her name. So that's my guest, Jyoti Singh.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you, Baljit. I think you touched a little bit about seva, and I think that's, as part of the work that you're doing, especially in South Asian culture, and sharing the stories of these incredible women who've been silenced. And so thank you. And so, and part of Jyoti, the world stood still for many weeks, and we are all remembering and praying for Jyoti's recovery in her death. I hope we have become more committed to fighting injustices all around us. So thank you for inviting these incredible women from history to the table today. I feel so honored to be in their presence. And I can only imagine the conversations that we would be having today if they were still alive. So thank you. And it's so important to share these women from history, and as you have shared, Baljit, to say their names. So thank you. And perhaps this is a good segue to introduce an artwork that Sandeep created for the Facade Festival here in Vancouver. Sandeep, as you know, I've always been fascinated by your generational insights because you bring historical figures like Jyoti Singh into a visual art form. And I wonder if you can tell us the animation you created honoring Jyoti.
Yes, of course. Yeah, when Baljit was speaking about Jyoti Singh, I could feel those feelings that you were feeling as well. And I remember when I first heard of what happened to Jyoti, I think I was stunned. I couldn't believe that this could happen to a human being. And collectively, I feel the outrage was palpable, and something in our collective conscious shifted after that incident. Um, Personally, I felt an anger and a despair that I don't think I had felt before or known before. And I wanted to tell Jyoti's story, but I didn't want it to be about my anger. And I was feeling so much anger at that time. And I didn't have the tools to work through the anger. So I just kept thinking about it, and I kept thinking about how I could share her story in a way that would do it justice and a way that would really truly honor her. And I got the opportunity last year, 7 years after Jyoti left us. And it was through Facade Festival, run by Broad Arts Foundation. So every 2 years, they invite 10 artists to create a digital work to be projected onto the facade of the Vancouver Art Gallery. And I thought this would be the perfect scale and public platform to finally share her story. And so I created a 5-minute animation with a local animator, Bambi Edlund. And I told Jyoti's story in kind of 5 parts. And so the first part was looking at Jyoti and the attack. And then it moved into the protest, because there were months and months of protest in India. And it was a real turning point, I feel. And then we move into sort of the repercussion, the people who are left behind, which segues into the healing that can come from this. And then I always want to make sure I'm talking about women and their stories in a lens of beauty, and there's a sense of triumph and hope. And so that was my goal with the piece, even though it's a really heavy topic, to leave it on this note of hope. Because for me, if I don't feel there's hope, then there's no point in doing the work that I do. And so I have a short video clip to show. It is just 30 seconds, and it's depicting her attack and death. And it was really tricky for me to think of how to depict that in a way that wasn't too graphic, but got the point across. So please enjoy the video.
Thank you, Sandeep, for sharing, that animation and Jyoti's story. I think what you've shared it's an incredible honor that, for your work to be displayed on such a large stage, and for everyone to witness it as a testament to Jyoti's story is incredible. And I remember being there that day also, being a witness to that, and how the emotions just kind of came over me, not knowing, her actual story. And
Mhm.
so for you to share it in such a way that as your own narrative is incredible. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I think into that question, I wanted to ask you, as we think of Zamana, in its contemporary moment, how have historically silent voices around gender inequality informed your visual storytelling in a way that reflects in your own artistic journey?
Yeah, so when I think about this question, I think about silence, and I think of how it is a tool of power and control, because how do you lord power over people? You silence them. And we've seen throughout history so many marginalized groups being silenced. And right now we're seeing the effects of that silence in all of the protests that are happening around the world. And so, growing up, I've always had a really strong sense of fairness and justice, especially within our culture. And seeing how differently boys were treated from girls and how boys were celebrated over girls, it really impacted me. And I took it to heart. And I questioned a lot of things. I asked my parents a lot of questions about, why are boys so revered and why are girls not revered? And they never had an answer, really. It's so ingrained, that it's just like, oh, that's just the way it is. And I mean, we have to dismantle that answer in order to change things and move forward. Um, and so I'm really interested in telling the stories of women, because so many have been permanently silenced through sexual violence, and their stories shouldn't die with them. I want to restore power to them in the afterlife. I want to tell their stories when they're no longer here to speak for themselves. I don't want them to be erased. I want them to be remembered. And I feel like it's our duty as a society to remember these women and to honor them by making real change in their names. And like Baljit was saying about, Jyoti's mom saying, say her name. I want you to know her name. We need to know these women's names and we need to know their stories so that we can change things. Um, so when I do create work around women's stories, it's always through a lens of beauty, because I want to make sure that I am doing my best to honor them and honor their legacy and their spirit. And it's important to me for my work to be very aesthetically beautiful. Um, and then when people take a longer, closer look at the work, they realize that maybe there's something in the work that's a bit unsettling. And then hopefully that will give them the curiosity to go figure out what the story's about, or, just sort of research on their own, because I never want to hit anyone over the head with, the stories. I want to give the information in a very digestible way and then have people take that information and research further. Um, yeah, and so that was evident in my work with Rest and Power. That was my first solo show in 2017, and it was dedicated to 12 women whose murders had really impacted me deeply. And I noticed when I was talking about the show at the beginning, I would talk about, 12 women who died. And I realized, well, they didn't die, they were murdered, and they were murdered for simply being women. And I had to make that distinction. And another thing I wanted to make sure I was doing was focusing on empowerment rather than victimhood. Because sometimes, there can be a fine line between telling someone's story in an empowered lens or treating them like a victim and nothing else. And so it's really become a cornerstone of my work, to share these stories and tell these stories. And I bring that into my murals as well. So, I do large scale public murals, and I center women in these murals. I create narratives with these women, and they're larger than life, and they're right there. They're telling you, we're here, we're not going anywhere, we deserve to be here, we deserve to be visible, we deserve to take up space, we have value, we have worth. And, my hope is that when women see those larger than life figures, it will encourage them to take up space and, feel their value, because, we're taught as women to shrink. We're taught that our voice doesn't matter, our thoughts don't matter, we need to take up less space. But, we're here to change that, and things are changing, and women are, standing up and speaking out and really, really being vocal about things that are wrong in our society and kind of leading the charge in how we can change it. So for me as an artist, it's particularly important that I use my platform as a platform for change. And I feel it is my duty as an artist to use my work to talk about the tough situations and the uncomfortable conversations. I like discomfort. I'm not scared of discomfort. I like talking about taboo things. I just want to open up a conversation and invite people to have that conversation with me and come up with solutions together.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, as you're touching base on beauty and kind of sharing these like really horrific stories, but sharing in your artwork, I mean, and having the tensions around that too. I mean, your murals do share these stories, and I think what's important that they're so distinct and they're so distinctly yours as well, kind of as you can see them around the city and as they're being shared. So yeah, incredible that you're sharing the voices of these women. It's really important for everyone to kind of see and think these through. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to add one more thing, also that it's really important that when people look at my work, they can tell that it's been made by a South Asian hand and that it's been made by a South Asian woman. It's really important for me to have that representation and that visibility for South Asian people as well.
Absolutely, and I know it reflects as well for your passion for social justice issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
And you've been inspired by our next speaker's book, Selector of Souls, in your recent, as you've shared, Rest in Power artworks. And I just want to quickly share that those drawings were a part of this table today as well,
Cool.
as the goddesses and the women that have been murdered. So it's fitting for me to welcome Shauna Singh Baldwin to speak with us today about how the feminine, which is also a set of qualities present in both men and women, has shifted and changed through the ages. Welcome, Shauna.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shauna, I was just thinking, you know, when you develop your characters, how do you bring the Zanani or feminine imagery from the past to your reader? You know, especially Selector of Souls. I hear the voices of women who are struggling to define their own lives by breaking with tradition, like Damini and Anu.
Well, you know, imagery from the past is fraught with danger. Often traditional imagery equates women with earth or cows or even objects such as jewels instead of people. Images of women have been crafted to appeal to the male gaze, and porn is lucrative for that reason. And then the imagery for Eastern women paints us as compliant dolls. Symbols for the feminine are often passive or lesser or subordinate or effect as opposed to masculine, which is cause. So again, it's created to please men, you know. And so we have to get away from that kind of imagery. Just like we're fighting racism and casteism, we're also fighting the past at every step. We're fighting the ideas of our elders. We're fighting the ignorance of previous generations using all the gifts and the powers that they've given us. So there's this irony in that as well. But as a storyteller, my job is to deal with the particular rather than the general. It's to individualize out of the group and to try not to resort to the sloppy shorthand of stereotyping. So, just for example, you're kind and nurturing and altruistic, you know, not just because you're a woman, you're kind and altruistic or something like that because you're you. So that makes it individual. And a man can be kind and nurturing and altruistic too. It doesn't make him less of a man, you know. So it's very important to me to bring that imagery from the past, but not to glorify it. Not to say, oh, that's fantastic, and aren't we nostalgic about it, and isn't it wonderful? A lot of it was not wonderful, and that's why we are where we are today, you know. So for me, my women characters, have the right to come to a definition of their own version of what is feminine. Um, and I think any woman will find traits in herself that we've traditionally thought of as masculine as well: bravery, resourcefulness, strategizing, reasoning, acting, planning, organizing, managing, controlling. All of those things are male as well as female. The warrior woman is also feminine, not just masculine, you know. So for me, that's how it's dangerous to bring imagery from the past into the present without some kind of a context around it and some kind of a journey that moves us from the past into the present and allows the characters to come to that different place that we all need to come to. So
I think you've touched like on a really unique piece is the glorifying and the glorifying of the past. And so if I encourage listeners to read Shauna's books, in particular to Selective Souls, because I think it's, you know, you're bringing the traditions too from the history and from as we've shared, like in this modern way. So, and the relationship between Damani and Anur is quite unique. So I think this would be a good intersect if you can, don't mind sharing a page or two from Selector of Souls.
I will. This particular reading is from partway into the book, almost to the end of the book, but I chose it because it's about creativity and it's about the creative process. The scene is actually where Damani is a Hindu widow of about 50, and her husband's name was Pyara Singh. She used to work in Delhi with a deaf woman she called Mem Sahib. She's holding a spirit possession in this scene because she's not satisfied with the way the male shaman held it, the Oja. She's trying to do this because she doesn't like the way that the guy did it. So she becomes possessed herself in order to speak her truth. And so this is the description of how that feels to be possessed by a goddess. And to me, that's also the same process of being creative. The drumming grows faster, louder. Damini's bones shift. Her spine tingles and curves into the shape of a sitting cobra. One shoulder is rising, rolling back, then the other. She sways, nods, rocks back and forth, and moans. Men's faces blur. Will the goddess answer her call? Blood and spirit open to rhythm. The air vibrates with the billion vibrations that are rising within Damini. An electrifying charge fills the air, and a billion interconnections seem to happen. Damini can see past, present, and future at once, as if watching a TV. She can smell them too, along with the spore of every body in the room. She is sitting, then standing. Mental and material energies merge. She is splitting. Is this dying? Herself flows out. No, it's that split state she knew in pregnancy, a shifting inside of herself to make way for another who watches unseen. The energy of Riti, commitments, and consciousness and connections revolves around her. She draws it in, takes in spirit, offers herself as the vortex of maximum energy, energy that impels her to speak. Faltering, strange sounds she does not recognize as her own. First syllables, then words, then phrases, not her own, not her voice, not her speech, but a lost language from a time before time. Damini's arms flail. She is shaking, trembling. She does not recognize the voices, but senses sound, intent, and a white heat rising from her womb to energize all matter, from the very smallest particle to the whole. Who is it who comes? Blood beats at her temples, beats to the drumbeat all around, making connections for which, as yet, there are no names. The unseen is not asleep. or simple but demonically active. Familiar asuras snap inside her, demons with long fangs. Now outside, frothing, they seem to rake her flesh with blood-tipped talons. Unexplored angers, angers swallowed and digested along with every fear she's ever given herself, is incarnated in these hungry ghosts, and they in her. They have lived within Damani from the time Damani was first taught she didn't matter. They have sucked in every need Damani never ever suppressed, every want that became don't want, every word she ever believed insignificant, every insult received. They swirl up from karma she has not expiated and orbit the room. They roar as they devour the present and the past. They command her breath, speak with her mouth, gesture with her arms. They will touch her future if she gives them power. She opens herself to Stri Shakti, and the asuras of fear subside. She is receiving a new language now, not an outer language like English, but a human, inner, feeling sense, rising from beyond sense, from all the knowing she already has. Its gestures are familiar, like that language she spoke with Memsahib, which had no high, no low, no he or she. One voice is more insistent, struggling up from all the others. Someone laden with gifts is present, someone from a time of abundance. Her head is full and empty all at once. She feels a great clarity and openness. Thinking, thought, any ideas she brought into this room full of expectant people fly from her and recede as she allows her body to enact what she witnessed only once before. Where does the voice come from? From a distance and from nearby, from above, from below ground, from air moving into a pair of ears, opening eyes, opening mouth, mouth so tightly closed. Beings appear and move through her mind, move fast, too fast. One feels stronger than the rest. Its Shakti wants to utter itself through her. She's losing her grip on the present. The voice springs from a place ever known, till there's only this moment, ever expanding, ever collapsing, and she is the rod, bringing it, birthing the voice.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. You really, as you're sharing your words and your voice, it's really come alive. And so thank you. I think it's really important, especially this book. So if listeners are able to, I highly recommend reading Sector of Souls. And beautiful that also Sandeep has taken inspiration from it as well. So thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
As some of you may have recently seen the incredible film, Because We Are Girls. And here with us today is Baljit Sangra, director. And before to start our discussion, I would like listeners and viewers to actually watch a trailer from the film.
Our family was your typical Punjabi family. We kept to ourselves, but were always up to celebrate an occasion with singing and dancing and eventually drama. When I was 11, that man came into our house. We were told, this is your brother, you respect him, and we gave him that respect. I was raped at 11 years old. Someone my parents trusted. I decided to come out because I witnessed something that this person is still active in abusing girls. And then my world shattered.
My parents didn't suggest us going to the police. That was a step that we had to take on our own. We were small, tiny children who didn't have any exposure to any of this. We had each other. That's how we got through our childhood. Even now.
Only 1% of women make it to where we've made it.
incredible. Thank you, Baljit. I'm just getting kind of emotional even rewatching it again. I've seen the film before. But Baljit, I just wanted to share that you metaphorically move the earth through your work. And truly our Zameen has shifted because of the film. So I wanted to ask you, how do you situate your filmmaking in women's lives, and especially about the most personally violent experiences that lift the veil on sexual predation and the confines of patriarchy? Oh, I think you're mute. There we go.
Yeah, well, I would say with this film, because we're girls, it's been a real journey and an honor to bear witness to the story of a Punjabi family confronted with the impact of sexual abuse. I was able to situate myself in the story by first having a relationship with one of the sisters. We were friends years before the film, so there was trust there. I was GT, and then I got to know the sisters and then the parents. So before even in the process, before bringing out camera, a lot of visits and getting to know each other, sharing about myself, their self. I was able to have um, maki roti and swag at the house with the parents and just share our shared history. You know how Indian parents are always like, where are you coming from, India? Where's your village? Or when did your family come? Just to find common ground. They're assessing me out too. So it was an honor just, in building in that relationship. So the film unfolds over 3 years. I was both a friend and a filmmaker following the story. So it got to a point where there was a lot of trust built, and often they didn't feel the camera was on. I believe I was able to get deeper with the family over time because we have this shared lived experience and come from the same community and culture. So much doesn't need to be explained, when the sisters talk about, sharam, and, we as in South Asian women, we know we hear that word sharam at a very young age to feel shame about everything almost. And then the word besharam, without shame, you don't have to really, just certain words, and they just hit you in your core of your growing up and your experience. So I absolutely understood why the sisters kept silent and what coming out would have meant 20 plus years later, and the point of view of their parents, the clash of tradition and modernity. And, when they talk about family honor, is it, you know what they mean, right? I find it even hard to sometimes explain is it in English. I understand how important it was to get their trust and honor that in the film, and that their story was everyone's story. I remember saying to her parents that this is everybody's story. Your experience will help other parents. This is not an isolated incident. This is everybody's story. And I'll just share a little anecdote. But when we finished the film and we were going to open a festival in Vancouver, Doxa, I really needed the whole family to watch this film. Some of them had seen it, and I went to the parents' house to show it. And I remember being so nervous. I kept looking over at the mom and dad because there's this big climactic scene. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where the girls confront their parents. Anyways, the film finished, and I asked her parents, auntie, uncle, how was that? How are you? And they were fine, and they gave me a big hug, and we all had a group hug. So yeah, that was huge. And I think when we tell our own stories, we really need to come from that place of understanding, and it's important. Because we're always fighting against stereotypes and people's perceptions of our community. So I sometimes just feel like the weight of that was on my shoulders for sure. Also, in terms of space, going along in this process with the sisters, the mantra really was there's no shame in the truth, and we all need to stand in the truth. I mean, that's when everything's got kind of sidetracked and challenges were huge and obstacles. That was always the mantra, they supported each other and there was no shame in standing in the truth. And I think as a filmmaker, I always feel the personal story is the universal story. you do a project or follow a story. You don't need to please everybody. Stay as personal. There's a lot of Punjabi in the movie. The climactic scene, is broken up in two, is almost entirely a Punjabi, and it needed to be that way. People could read subtitles, but we need to be authentic and to the truth. The film has Bollywood clips that show how Bollywood informed their idea of fantasy and escape, but also reinforced traditional gender roles. I felt that was really important, and I think we can all relate to that. Yeah, the sisters sought justice, system and in the system, and took the abuser and their cousin to Supreme Court. It was a long journey. They did it to protect their daughters and the next generation. So the film, in extension, is also Seva. We acknowledge that too while we were doing this, because it was not easy. There were so many delays, trials, and tribulations. They were ready to go to court. I'd be ready to film it, and it would just be adjourned. And this happened for a year. So it's a really tough journey to be on, and rewarding. But yeah, I really saw firsthand what women go through when they pursue justice, and how the systemic barriers of doing that. When we opened the film, which is another anecdote, the whole family came and the parents were there, and they got a standing ovation. And people, a lot of men I know and young men, came to the father and thanked him for being brave and being real in that scene. So I think that's really important, and I think they felt that their story is going to ripple and have a greater effect. So yeah, I just want to share that anecdote. In terms of my lens, I feel the personal is political. The story follows a journey, but weaves past, present, their childhood, immigrant experience, racism. There was intense emotional moments, but there was also moments of joy, resilience, sisterhood, lightness and darkness. And I think that's really important too. And in terms of patriarchy, I just really hope the film challenges that cultural, social values that perpetuate women's subservience and obedience. We hope to shift this misplaced shame, because that's what gives perpetrators power. So that's sort of been my experience on this film, and situated, how I was able to do it, and the systems of patriarchy around it.
Thank you, Baljit. Yeah, I mean, just as you're sharing, the piece around Shadam, and shame, it is, as you've shared, it's so ingrained in our culture. But in the film in itself, there's so much vulnerability, so much bravery. And I think one piece that you have touched on too is that how much other women were coming out as well and sharing their own stories. So in that sense, the support and having this community come together during this time, as we know, as it happens in so many other different cultures as well, sure. But thank you for your seva for putting this forward in our community and during this time especially. So thank you. And I was just also curious, and something I was thinking about, as we think of Zameen, I'm curious, like, what has been your Zameen, your grounding, and the place that motivates and inspires you to do this? And just in a couple sentences, if you can, yeah.
Just being true to myself. Where I'm a South Asian woman. I was born here. My father was born here. My mom's from India. I feel in doing this work, it's a kind of a privilege to be an artist and a storyteller, really. I feel sometimes, but also I feel like when, especially say this film and other films, I feel the voice of past generations, and I think, my parents, especially my mother and grandparents, they were sowing those seeds, and you just don't know what's going to happen with it. But I really feel that I'm able to take it further. But my mom's always that grounding, I think, is really come also from my own family. My mother's really grounded me and said, it's up to your generation to change things. We had no choices. My mom wasn't allowed an education. Her parents thought, why would you educate a girl? But, they put their sons to master's degrees. So, my mom anything that came up, she was always like, why are you accepting, you know, why is your generation accepting this? You need to challenge this. So I think, you know, this film and this sort of journey I'm in on has definitely been reflective of that place. In terms of plays, it's sort of an anecdote, but sort of a little say, anyway, let's share the story. It just came to popped in my head. I was when before the screening of Because We're Girls in Vancouver, we opened the Doxa Festival at the Playhouse, and I got a call like I think the day before, or could you be on the cover of the Georgia Straight? I'm like, what? Anyways, I'm like, well, and then they're like, find a location that would have some meaning to you, and I'm like, well, where would I? What has meaning to me, or a space? And immediately I thought of Sandeep's mural, or the woman standing on a tiger, which is like blocks from my house. And that was really the mantra of this whole journey, women standing on tiger. And, you know, I really thank you, Sandeep, for having that. I mean, that was I think he gave 2 options. It didn't make the Georgia Straight, but I only did 1 studio shot, and I wanted it there because that meant so much. I've never been anywhere where we're reflected in such a strong way. Visually, it's pretty powerful. So in terms of place, you know, thank you for creating spaces and being in my space, you know, and Shauna Singh Baldwin, thank you so much for all your stories and honoring women and us drawing inspiration from those women, you know. So yeah, it's been a real honor to share space with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Even virtual space is wonderful.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Baljit. I feel such an honor today to be in the presence, and even virtually, with you 3 today, and especially with the powerful women from history as well. So thank you. So I guess, you know, each of you have pushed the boundaries of storytelling by creating your artistic forms that inform and motivate society to reflect the feminine in our age of existence. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, and we'll get to have some time to hear from our listeners today. So I will share some questions with everyone today. I have a question from Shauna Sandra. Her question is, how to make art and aesthetics accessible in terms of South Asian languages? I don't know if Shauna, I'll cue that one for you possibly.
Okay. Well, language is so fraught because we are going from multilingual people down to one language. When I write, for instance, the problem is that the story only can be written in one language, which is, in my case, English. But the people that I'm writing about, or the characters I'm writing about, think in many different languages, and they speak in many different languages, often within the same sentence. But if you're writing in English, there's another problem in that you're coming from gendered languages to English, and every object has a gender in Hindi or Punjabi or French as well. So when every object is gendered, that's going to be the lens through which your characters see things, you know. So we have a challenge. You know, it's not easy because the other problem is, of course, English is so imbued with the Bible and idioms from the Bible and Shakespeare as well. So these are our pitfalls and our minefields and all of this stuff that we have to avoid. But at the same time, we have to let the spirit show through. So my advice is just to follow the spirit, really, because that's what's going to come through your writing, going to come through your storytelling, whether it's in visual art or whether it's in film. You got to follow the spirit, because otherwise you can get so tied down in the limitations of English that we have to explore and we have to expand. So don't be afraid of neologisms. Don't be afraid to, you know, make new space. So that's where I come from on that.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important question as we think around language and place as well, or, you know, the Zameen, and thinking where each kind of culture comes from and where we're placed as well. So thank you.
Can I add to that as well, Sandy?
Absolutely.
yeah, and just, you know, as a visual artist thinking about visual language, over the last few years, I've developed my own visual vocab. And I think part of what it's about for me is I've spent so much time kind of hiding from my culture and, you know, being embarrassed of being Indian. And as an adult, I've reclaimed all of that, and I'm doing that through my art as well, where when I get to create the work that truly speaks to me, it's the work that's really bold, vibrant, colorful, like completely maximalist, patterned. And that's what I love about Shauna's work too, is when, because I did have Rest in Power based off of Shauna's book Selector of Souls. A lot of the imagery came from her words, and I find that your work is really maximalist too with your language. There's so much information, so much you can glean from that visually, and I feel like I do that with my work as well. I just pack it with all of these references to our culture and hope that when people look at it, especially people who are South Asian, they're going to feel reflected in that work. So that's yeah, how I approach it.
That's the spirit. We have to be represented. We have to be at the table. We
Yeah.
have to assert ourselves, and our stories matter. That's the important thing for me.
Absolutely. And I think just a note too, Sandeep, I think I've shared that with you before, sharing the same testament, you know, just the shame of growing up and being Punjabi. I mean, it was truly, you know, being brown or any sort of, you know, figure in that way, and being woman, it was cared. And, you know, I know the Baljit has shared that too, the shadam and the shame, and in different contexts naturally, and the traditions around that, and what does it take. So thank you so much for sharing the, you know, in your own visual language, and also Shauna in your language, and Baljit, as people are observing films like that. So that's great. I think there's a really great question for
Oh, sorry, just a little bit on that. Yeah, if you want to stay true to the story, we got to stop trying to make it like, oh, this film needs to be accessible for everybody, or tone this down, or there's too many subtitles. Like, you just have to forget that. Just be true to the story, and you know, people will get it and appreciate it. You can't do that. You have to be like so personal. You know, I remember some people said, with Because We're Girls, there'd be dialogue, but just like one line, but there'd still be talking and talking. And people would be like, Baljit, I think I'm missing a lot because, but you know what? It's too bad. This is the gist of what they said. I can't put every word, but I need to have it in that language. You know, we can't always just cater to it's our time now to push and make our own space and be true to that story. You can't say, well, you know, in that big climax scene, can we now do it in English? Like, you just cannot do that. Because language is such a through line to everything, right? To culture, to history, to everything. And we need to stop trying to make our work fit, you know, the mainstream. They can fit to us now. You know what I mean? That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to say that involves making new symbols. It involves actually changing the symbol set or the symbolism that we've been given with English, because the West has certain symbols that we have the opposite. So let's say an owl is the symbol of wisdom in the West, and of course for us it's Uluda Patha, you know, it's absolutely the opposite. So I think we have to let the story itself create the symbols so that the viewer or the reader, in my case, is fully aware that this is not happening in a space that they are familiar with if they are mainstream. And if it is happening in a space in which you are familiar, you recognize and you go, oh yeah, you know? So I think part of it is that we don't imagine ourselves as audience enough. So only once we start to think of ourselves as the audience, instead of saying, oh, well, you know, I'm writing this for the West because it's in English, you know, only then can you actually say, remember those symbols? And let me define for you what they are, let's say, in the story. But these are my symbols and they're fun. They're a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really important piece to kind of share as well, the symbols around language and what those kind of and the representation around them too, and who gives them representation.
Can I add one thing as well? Speaking about symbols, Shauna, and Baljit, like, not having to cater to everybody. It's okay for people to sit in that discomfort of, maybe reading a book or watching your film or looking at my work and not fully understanding it, and sit with that kind of discomfort of like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this word means. I don't know what this language means. And maybe that will push that person to learn more about it, or just have that awareness of, maybe that's how we felt in certain spaces and places where we feel uncomfortable or that sense of discomfort. But just that general idea, it's okay to be uncomfortable because that's when you're pushed to grow.
Or ignorant. I mean, I feel so ignorant about Sikhism. When I first started writing What the Body Remembers, I became aware that I knew nothing. So I really had to search through and read and ask my elders and things like that. And I now look back and cringe, at my own ignorance. But what the heck, you start somewhere.
Yeah.
I have a comment here that I would like to share from Maharuna, Ghani. She says, thank you, Baljit Sangra, for making this film and sharing the truth. Yes, agreed. We all need to stand in the truth and act in truth. Yes, personal story is a universal story. Power to you. So much meaning with what with you and this family has shown, bravery, courage, and truth. So I just wanted to share that comment. And then going to our second question, and this is for Sandeep from Satwinder Bains. Sandeep, how do we work on female anger against injustice and for it to be channeled into action and healing?
Good question. First, recognizing that it's okay to be angry and understanding that you can use that anger to fuel important work. Because throughout my life, I sat on a lot of anger and I felt often very helpless, but at some point I realized I can't just sit on this anger. I have to do something with it. Otherwise, I'm not changing anything. I'm not affecting anything. And so for me, I've been using my anger as a catalyst to create the work that I do so that it can affect change. So I think really like acknowledging our anger, looking at our anger, being okay with our anger, because oftentimes, we're told as women, we're not allowed to be angry and we can't show those types of emotions. But, we are angry and we want to show those emotions and we want to use those emotions to catalyze change. And so, yeah, it's just, I feel pretty good with my anger. We're pretty good friends now. And it's been really helpful in my career to create the work that I do and, just sort of encourage others to feel that anger as well and that discomfort and, use that as that.
Shauna, I think you wanted to share.
I just wanted to say that when I was writing The Selective Souls, I learned the concept. I don't know where it came from to me, but I learned the concept of rational anger. And I like that idea that there are times when it's bloody rational to be angry, and you have a right to be angry, as long as you're not, turning that into destruction and you're turning it in some creative direction and making change, as you said. I think it's perfectly rational sometimes to be angry, and all anger is not irrational.
Absolutely. It's really important to kind of share. And also how anger sits in our bodies, and and that comes from all sorts of different places in our lives. But for it to be outputted into these sort of narratives and storytelling and is quite incredible. I have a question from Alana, and she has shared, which I thought was quite unique. How do you know what to share about your culture or experiences that relate to culture and identity, and what to keep private?
Who's that for?
If you, Baljit, if you'd like to, if you want to share.
You're the one who's
Well, I mean, I was just gonna say an example, like say with Because We're Girls and other work I've done, and you get that access, and it's a real privilege, so you have to hold a lot of trust, because people get used to you, they trust you, they don't even know the camera's there, And so when you're crafting the film together, you have to really honor that. But, you know, if you look at what's available, say in TV with reality TV, and people just put like so much trauma on the screen, like I don't agree with that. You know, less is more. You know, you have to respect and honor the people that you know you're representing. It's important. You know, they have children. You don't need every little thing. It's not. You don't need the detail of an assault. You don't need that. I personally feel that. Um, yeah, unfortunately, as a culture, we just put like everything up there, and I just don't think that's necessary. You don't need to be such a voyeur into people's lives. You know, and I think there needs to be a balance. You can't just have if it's something challenging or difficult, there's also people are so multifaceted. There's joy in our life, there's celebration in our life, you know, something, there's contradiction in our life, you know, like uh, yeah. I just think, you know, we're so much bigger than one thing, and you should really, and if you're an artist and you're interpreting something, you really have to honor where those stories are coming from, and you know, and challenge stereotypes too. Like I really think, you know, the personal is universal. Keep it true to who they are and honor that, you know. And like if you were like, say, with Because We're Girls, I mean, if that was my family, how would I want that film up there, you know? Like I don't know, I just felt that anyways. So I think that's which we're really seeing a really cool shift now, all across the arts around representation matters. I think that's super important because you do have a certain access in telling a story. You know, I could ask 10 questions to South Asian, and somebody non-South could ask the same 10. I think I'm going to probably be able to get a little deeper. It'll just go that way. I just feel that way. And it's our time to tell our own stories. We've seen the sort of anthropological look at our stories for too long. And, you know, and I just really, you know, besides like story of telling like film, but just even in public spaces like the art gallery, you know, I took my nephew and I saw Sandeep's artwork at the art gallery and we took pictures. That's incredible experience, you know. And I've gone to the Surrey Art Gallery and there's been incredible, you know, showings of South Asian artists and dialogue in mainstream spaces. Like this is so, or book reading, this is so important. We got to stop feeling that we need to be on the fringe. You know, we're here, we've arrived. Like this, we need to just keep it moving.
Some profound words there, Baljit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very inspiring.
Thing there. I'd like to add something about retelling of stories of women from the past, because sometimes we need to go back and retell the stories because they have been told with such Orientalism and such exoticization. And there's a reason that we are revisiting some of these stories. For example, Noor Inayat Khan's story has been told many times, but always told by men, but always told by people from the West. In fact, in some cases, told in a gospel format. I mean, it's really quite annoying the way her stories have been told. So for me, the problem with that is also I don't want to betray her again. So I have to be very careful not to go down that route that other stories have been, you know? So it's not just what do I bring to the table as a South Asian, but it's also how do I do this without re-betraying the person who I feel has already been betrayed.
And can I add one?
Yeah.
So I was just reaching to grab stories for South Asian Supergirls. So Shauna, what you were saying about retelling women's stories, this was such an important project for me last year. I was one of 10 South Asian female illustrators, and there are 50 profiles of South Asian women, past and present. And, you know, it was such a joy, but like such an important project for me to be involved in because we didn't have these stories growing up.
We didn't.
Right? We didn't have these role models. We didn't have any of this. And so now we get to be a part of that change. We get to be, you know, the role models that are creating the work for the younger generation. And so it really is just like such a point of pride. And going back to that question, I think taking the parts from your culture that resonate with you, the things that you want to talk about, as long as you're being authentic, you know, and not doing what you think you should be doing, but taking points of reference that are you feel strongly about and you feel passionate about and you want to talk about them or make a film about them, write about them, create art around them.
Passionate in a positive way, by the way, because if you're feeling passionate in a contemptuous way, you're not going to do a good job. You know,
Yes.
we've had that.
Positive passion.
Yeah, we've had that as well. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's also, sharing perspectives in our culture that perhaps no one has really known about. I did the photography exhibition on Gesh, and it was, of Sikh men and showcasing their hair, their unshorn hair. And that's never really been done, especially from a South Asian woman, female, going into these homes. And so just that note of, what to share about your culture and how to do it I think it's also very difficult. I mean, I think it's, and to that part of access, right, Shauna? I mean, who gets to have access to these, and who gets to talk about them, who gets to share their ideas, and who gets to mark that. I think that's, all those pieces are related. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and the access cannot be betrayed. That trust that somebody has placed in you by giving you access, that cannot be betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Absolutely.
I have actually run stories by people who I felt might have been the basis for it, and have I fictionalized it enough? And quite often they did not recognize themselves, so that was good. But often they did and said, well, you know what? It's not me, actually. It's similar, but it's not me. You know?
Yeah.
So a real person is so much more than that. So, like Baljit said, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this would be a good question to maybe possibly to end off on. It's from Anoop Dollywall on Facebook, and she asks, "Do you folks have any advice for emerging South Asian female artists?" Maybe Baljit or Shauna.
I would just say go for it. Go for it and just give it the commitment that it needs. And just because you can self-publish doesn't mean you should. The things that you need to do to grow yourself as an artist, and there's so many ways in which you can do it that I have not even imagined. So you take it forward, you go for it. So.
That's great. Great advice. Sandeep, do you have any wisdom or?
Oh, always. Yeah, again, like echoing Shauna, just do it. But really put the work and the time in to figure out what your unique voice is. Because everyone has a unique voice. And I think sometimes we start out by emulating other people's work or doing things that are trendy or popular that don't necessarily speak to what we want to talk about. But I mean, it's always a good starting point just to try different things and kind of see where you land. But really just try to be authentic to who you are, create work that is interesting to you. Don't worry about pleasing other people while you're in this process of figuring out, who you are as an artist and what your voice is.
Yeah, I would echo the same. Be true to yourself. I mean, in film, it'll be a long journey. So it's really got to speak to you because you're going to stick with it for a long time, try to get funding, pitch everything. I was at a festival, and a young a filmmaker came up to me, and he wanted to chat, and he had this project and he was going to be pitching it. And the way he never really talked about the story. It was like, this could be marketable to here, or this could be here, and I could, like all these other things, but never the story. And I'm like, story is everything.
Yeah.
What's the story? I go, does this story resonate with you? Do you love this story? Does it touch you? Are you going to be committed to the story? He's like, well, no, but it could be doing this. It could be do that. It could be my calling card. It's like, nah, bring it back to story and what resonates to you. Don't, just think of a marketing plan and that's what you're going to go pitch with. It's got to be back to story and your connection to that story, right? So, and also too, I think as a women, and because we're girls, the majority of the women that work behind this, the majority of the crew behind the scenes were women. And I thought that was really important with this film to have, the women composer, women sound designer, women editor, like wherever. I think that's really important. And I definitely think, we need to help each other, if you can open the door, bring more people with you. So I think that's really important.
And one more thing, and that is tell the story that only you can tell.
Yes.
Really important to me anyway.
What a beautiful way to land and conclude our conversation today. It's been truly an honor to be in the presence with you all virtually and together. And I hope in the future we're able to actually share a meal in person and not to have these ways of living currently. So I just want to share a warm welcome to Shauna, Baljit, and Sandeep for coming here today. So thank you. And I just want to share a few more sentiments. On behalf of Surrey Art Gallery, I'd like to conclude today's conversation by thanking our amazing speakers and also my incredible colleagues here at Surrey Art Gallery, along with Indian Summer Festival's talented team in tech. To have our first live and virtual event partnered with Indian Summer Festival has been so lovely. So thank you, Suresh and Laura. And congratulations to your 10th anniversary this year. And a special thank you to our audience for tuning in today and joining us, sharing your comments from far and near, while you may be sitting in a city across the nation or right close by. Your presence has been truly felt today. So I just want to say thank you again, and what a true honor, and what a rich dialogue and discussion. So hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.